Welcome, everyone. We'll take just a second for everyone to get into the lobby here. We appreciate you all joining us today for Niner Knowledge Hidden Gems. This is going to be one of our most interactive and exciting Niner Knowledge that we've had so far. So I'm really excited to see what Justin has for us today and for you all to see how to make your own gems and how to use AI in a smart and impactful way. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be live on our website later this week. You'll just get an email if you registered for the webinar with a link to the recording later this week that lives on our webpage, on our Niner Knowledge past events webpage. We have closed captioning available at the bottom of your screen. You can select on closed captioning if you need it. There's also a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can use that Q&A to ask questions of both Justin and our team. If you have any technical questions or issues, please use the Q&A function to ask our team. If you have any questions about the webinar or of gyms or AI or anything that you want to ask Justin throughout the webinar, please put that in the Q&A. And at the end of the webinar, we will go through those questions. With that, I'd like to introduce Hannah Jacob. She's the Director of Alumni Engagement Programming, who will introduce Justin.
Thanks, Josh, and welcome everybody. So thank you for joining us today for this edition of Niner Knowledge. As Josh mentioned, my name is Hannah Jacob. I am Director of Alumni Engagement Programming. We're really excited to bring this program to all of you this afternoon. Excited to have record registration, and it's going to be really great. So now I'm pleased to introduce our featured speaker, Justin Carey. So Justin is the Program Director for the new Human-Centered AI Concentration in Interdisciplinary Studies at UNC Charlotte, launching this fall in the College of Humanities and Earth and Social Sciences. With more than a decade of experience as a faculty member, he brings a deep commitment to human-centered approaches to AI, emphasizing ethical frameworks, creativity, collaboration, and critical thinking. Justin's work bridges the humanities, social sciences, and emerging technologies to prepare students for an evolving AI-driven workplace while supporting educators in reimagining learning for the future. Justin?
Hello, good morning, everyone, and hello, I guess good afternoon now. Thank you, Hannah, thank you, Josh, and thank you all so much for being here today with me and with us. It's great to be here together. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And as I'm just sort of saying hello, you're more than welcome to take a look there at that QR code and that little tiny URL. If you'd like to put that into your browser window, if you're at a computer, you're welcome to. That will take you to these slides so you can kind of follow along. As Josh mentioned, there will be plenty of opportunities to click on things or interact or go to some things. So you're welcome to have these slides as we go forward. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be here to share some information and some use cases on this sort of element of AI called GEMS, something that Google Gemini has on offer. And so, as Hannah mentioned, my name is Justin Carey, and I wear a few different hats. I'm a senior lecturer in the Writing, Rhetoric, Digital Studies department here at UNC Charlotte. I'm also a faculty fellow, an AI faculty fellow with the Center for Teaching and Learning. And I'm in this exciting new role as program director for human-centered AI. So today's presentation is called Hidden Gems, From Prompting to Partnerships in Everyday AI. And that human-centered part is going to be really important in this because sometimes it's really useful for us to think about what does it mean to consider artificial intelligence from this humanistic lens. And I really want to start with that idea. So we're going to go to this next element here and look at a book. One of the very first books that I read when I was really starting to get into artificial intelligence is this great book by author Verity Harding called AI Needs You. And I loved this book when I first read it because it brings this really important perspective to artificial intelligence technology about why AI needs people, why it needs humans. So Verity Harding presents this really interesting historical perspective. And in this book, one of the themes that comes out is this idea that technology is built by human beings. And so human beings bring to it both their light and their shadow. And so with any technology, with anything that we're using, there is kind of this promise of peril. There's promise and there is peril. And we as human beings bring to it both sides of that coin. And so it's really important as humans that we think about what we are doing when we decide to or not to use the tools that we use. How do we bring that element to the use of this technology? How do we make decisions? How do we think critically about how we approach using the technology that is available to us at any given moment? So how do we engage in that sort of critical thinking and that sort of agency when it comes to this technology that is available to us? So that's going to be a really important kind of frame for our work together and our thinking together today. So to start with this, I think we've all maybe, most of us perhaps, have had this experience where maybe we've interacted with these things called chatbots, right? Things like Gemini or Copilot or ChatGPT. Maybe we've asked chatbots a question or two, or we've used AI to write an email, or maybe we've gotten help with a last minute dinner recipe. But what if everyday AI could kind of be more than that? So today we're going to be thinking about a powerful tool that anyone can use right now for free. And I say that kind of with an asterisk, right? Because you've probably heard this old adage that, like, if the service or the product is free, then maybe you are the product. And that's going to be an important consideration for us as we think about this today. But the reason I've mentioned this, and one of the reasons why we're looking at this particular technology today, or this particular example of this technology, is because there is an accessibility feature here. And by that, I mean people can access the thing that we're about to look at without having to subscribe to it. So Gemini Gems, a feature of Google Gemini's suite of AI tools, is free for users. You do not need a paid subscription to use, share, and create these things we're going to be looking at today called gems. And again, we're going to be talking about some of the perils and potentials of that. Gems can transform everyday AI use from generic prompting into customizable AI collaboration. So with Gems, you can really go from prompting to partnership, from AI driven to you driven, as we explore how to curate Google's free to use custom tools to make AI your own, centering your expertise, your experience, and your needs as we kind of transform everyday AI into a personalized creative partner that can amplify your expertise and make your work faster, smarter, and more human-centered. That's the premise. So what are we actually going to be doing today? Well, first we're going to do a brief kind of somewhat brief technical overview so that we kind of can demystify the chatbot a little bit. Then an intro to gems. What are they? How do they work? How do we make them? Kind of a peek under the hood. Specifically, we're going to be doing 3 steps to building gems: knowledge curation, identity, and then how do we share them? So how do we kind of take a gem outside of the Google platform and put it somewhere else so it's more convenient to get to it? And then a brief conclusion. That's our agenda for today. So we're going to be starting with demystifying the chatbot. So what actually is a chatbot? Like, what is Gemini? What is Copilot? What are these things that we are kind of interacting with when we are using these chatbot tools, these technologies? What are these things? You've heard GPT, right? Chat GPT. That's what a chatbot is. It's a type of technology. And a GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. OpenAI sort of invented this. And the first one that launched universally and became very, very popular and kind of changed a lot of things came out in the fall of 2022 when ChatGPT-3 launched. The generative part of that acronym has to do with a machine learning algorithm that can learn patterns from unlabeled data. All right. So a big giant data set, and this algorithm goes through there and it can sort of sift through all of that data and it can recognize and learn patterns within that data that has no labeling to it. It has no identifying characteristics. The machine learning algorithm can just learn from all of that data. That's kind of the generative part of this. It's connected to the pre-training part of that acronym. This is an important part of the process where all of this really massive amount of data is sifted through by this machine learning algorithm and patterns are recognized. And when we're talking about patterns, what we're sort of alluding to is this idea of what is the percentage of time, for example, when the word the appears after the word and in a sentence. And so a machine learning algorithm can kind of go through a big corpus of data, like pieces of writing, and whatever, and it can sort of create a percentage score, if you will, of how often it sees the word the after the word and. But it's not quite as simple as that because it can also kind of create percentages between that instance of and the, but then also connect that to, oh, it also appears connected to this other instance of language, or the word and the word cat, and this paragraph over here, and this other thing. And it creates all of these really fascinating stochastic probability matrices of how all of these predictive patterns occur within language or within image. Way more patterns than kind of you would expect. There's all of these different things that occur within these patterns. So an algorithm can learn all of that. Language, of course, created by humans. That, if we think back to that Verity Harding quote, bring both light and dark, right? We have the shadow and we have the light, and kind of we have all of this promise and all of this peril. So there's all sorts of things that are being captured within that pattern recognition data that the algorithm has captured. And then the third part of that GPT acronym is the transformer part. So this is kind of the new thing that happened. With all of that copious amount of data, the GPT is able to take its pre-training, all of those patterns that exist in this sort of neural network of nebulous predictive data, and it can make guesses. It can say, oh, okay, now I have some data, some patterns, some percentages, and based on those percentages, I can make a guess. When you ask me a question, I can make a guess about what you want me to say. And that's what AI, generative AI, is. It's essentially a guess. Often that guess is correct. Sometimes it's not. That's when you hear about hallucinations. So that's essentially what a generative pre-trained transformer is. There's a couple of other steps in that process, but for the most part, when you hear about a GPT, like a chatbot, that's what it is. Now, there's a few other things I'd love to cover here before we get into building one of these. Impact is something that's really important for us to think about. In 2025, Google did a little self-reporting. Now, I will caveat this with a little asterisk to say, this is a company that produces generative artificial intelligence doing a report about their own impact. It would be good if we had some third-party work happening there to sort of do that, but that isn't happening. But a lot of the big AI companies are not even doing their own sort of environmental impact reports, but Google is doing that at least. And you're welcome to check out that report. It's linked at the bottom there. But what they found was that the end user overall environmental impact of a query to a GPT is about equivalent to watching 9 seconds of television. So just think about the last time you watched Netflix or you watched a show, and the environmental impact of that, and then compare that to like if we're going to be prompting an AI or if we're going to be building a chatbot and you're going to be using that. It's like watching 9 seconds of television, according to Google's energy report and water usage report. So I had this experience a few weeks ago when I was in Raleigh, and I was sitting in a hotel lobby at about 5 o'clock in the morning getting coffee, and the hotel was kind of not awake yet. And I was sitting in the lobby, and there was at least four high def TVs just on in the lobby of this hotel. One in the lobby, two above the bar, and one kind of over in the game lounge. And I was sort of contemplating this report, and I was like, wow, that's four TVs that are just on all the time, 24/7. That's a lot of 9 seconds. So AI has a serious environmental impact, which I'm sure you've heard about and should be considered, especially in the pre-training part of this process. When companies are spending a lot of water and energy usage to train these models, there is a lot of environmental impact there. But this, according to Google, is what the environmental impact looks like for end user usage of this. And again, that's according to Google. I also wanted to mention a hardware side of this. So when you hear about the cloud, right? When we hear about the cloud, what is the cloud? The cloud is essentially a data center. And I'm sure that you've heard about data centers and sort of the impact data centers are having in communities. Data centers are really important to think about and what those are doing. So when you send a query to a model like Gemini or ChatGPT, that query goes to the cloud. It goes to a data center. And in those data centers are computers, like the one I have in my house that I use for playing video games. In that computer is a GPU, like a graphical processing unit made by a company like NVIDIA. And that graphical processing unit has to be run by a CPU, and that whole system has to be cooled. This is where the water usage conversation comes in, because that cooling system is water cooled, has to be cooled by liquid water. So there's two ways to do that primarily. One is called evaporative cooling and one is called closed loop cooling. Evaporative cooling is just sort of water gushing through that system, hitting those hot hardware components and evaporating instantly. This uses a lot of water because it just evaporates. This is often employed because it's easier to remove hardware components and replace them quickly, and so it's convenient, but it uses more water. Closed loop cooling is like what most consumer gamers have on their PCs, where you have like a radiator hooked up to your CPU that is cooling that CPU. And it's not using new water, it's just looping water through that system over and over again to cool things down. A lot of companies are moving, like Google, are moving towards newer closed loop systems in order to use less water. It just takes more innovation to do that. And so things are happening in that space. And then the last thing I'll mention about impact is this new federal regulation, this ratepayer regulation, this federal initiative called the Ratepayer Protection Pledge, which is asking big companies to sign a pledge like Amazon, Google, and Meta to say if you're going to build a data center, then the rising costs of water and electricity are not going to be passed on to the consumer. Several of the major companies like Google and Amazon and Meta have signed this pledge. Their one criticism of this is that there is no sort of way to there's nothing in the pledge to say what will happen if the companies choose not to actually fulfill their part of the promise. But this is something that exists, and you're more than welcome to take a look at that. The link to it is there in the presentation. So I just wanted to mention what is a GPT and what are some of the impacts of this technology, because I think we have to look at some of this before we get into actually using it. Um, and then we have to talk about data privacy, because this is really, really important too. So I work at UNC Charlotte, and we have some data privacy regulations here that I'll mention in a second. And many of you, we are all kind of in this Niner community, so it's important to think about what our university is doing. But if you're not at UNC Charlotte right now and you have a Gmail account, then you have access to GEMS. So if you don't have the same protections that we have currently at UNC Charlotte, this is something to really think about if you are using Google services and sort of your own private account, your own personal account. This setting right here, called Keep Activity Setting, is extremely important for when you are thinking about your data privacy. By default, in your personal Gmail account, your personal Google account, this setting is turned on. And if this setting is turned on, when you use a gem or you prompt Gemini, as it states right here, Google uses your activity to provide, develop, and improve its services, including training generative AI models. So if you don't want that, you can turn Keep Activity to off. And if you turn it to off, then your future chats won't appear in your activity and won't be used to train our AI models. So this comes directly from Google's policy on Keep Activity Setting. To do that, and I'll show you how to do that in a second, but this is the difference with what UNC Charlotte has for faculty, staff, students, and administrators within our UNC Charlotte Enterprise Data Protection accounts. So we have a different account at UNC Charlotte with an agreement with Google to provide data protected enterprise accounts. So inside of our data protected enterprise accounts, no data that we send is going to be used to train future LLMs, and all queries are stripped of personally identifying information. So all FERPA regulations are adhered to when using generative AI tools with your UNC Charlotte account here on campus for all faculty, staff, students, and administrators. So that's an important distinction between personal accounts and the accounts that you might have access to here at UNC Charlotte with data protection enterprise accounts. So if you are using a personal account, which many of you today may be, if you have a Google account, if you watch YouTube, if you've got a Gmail account, then you've got access to the tool that we're going to be exploring today. So you may want to think about your data privacy if you're going to be exploring some of the content that we're going to look at today. So this is what it looks like when you head over to gemini.google.com or google.gemini.com. And when you get there, there's a little settings button on the bottom left. If you click that settings button once you're logged in, it will bring up this little bar here with all sorts of options. The top of that is called activity. And that arrow should be a little bit higher. Activity is what you want there. If you click activity, it takes you to this. Inside of activity is where you can turn on or off your keep activity setting that we just mentioned. So this is a really important setting to think about if you are interested in that sort of data privacy aspect of this and whether or not you want Gemini to be using your information to train their future models. So that's a really important thing to think about when it comes to sort of your own human agency in using this technology. The last piece of context before we can jump into some hands-on stuff is really important, and it has to do with bias. According to IBM, AI bias is defined as also called machine learning bias or algorithm bias. And this refers to the occurrence of biased results due to human biases that skew the original training data or AI algorithm that we talked about a little bit earlier in that GPT explanation. So this can lead to distorted outputs and potentially harmful outcomes. So the training data is biased, human beings are biased. This is just a reality. We have preferences for things, things happen, this is innate. And so when an AI algorithm is trained on a set of data, this comes through, and we can sort of see this in a very clear way. So the question then becomes, what do we do? It's really important. This is where we start getting into thinking about that human part of AI interaction and really start thinking about why it's so important to consider the role that human beings need to play in not only building AI systems that are responsible, ethical, and trustworthy, but the parallel to that is the human beings that are then using those AI systems on the other side. And really thinking about how we can use these tools in ethical, responsible, and critical ways to ensure that we are sort of doing our job as the expert humans to use these tools in thoughtful, responsible, and critical ways. So a question that we can kind of ask ourselves is how, when, and whether. How has the AI system that I am using been trained? And we might not have that answer, but we can start to think about like who is responsible for building this? Where does this come from? Is it Google? Is it Meta? Is it ChatGPT from OpenAI? Like how is this system built? And maybe just doing a little digging on that to make sure that the system I'm using is the one that I want to use. And then when am I going to deploy that system and for what purpose? So really thinking about that sort of question of am I just sort of going along with this, or is it something that I actually am interested in using for a specific purpose? And what is that purpose? And then that whether question. So whether or not AI is even the right tool for the task at hand. At the end of the day, AI is a tool, and this tool can do a lot of interesting things, and so can human beings. And so really censoring that sort of agency and that decision making is really important. So thinking about what role do humans play in this process, and thinking about do I want to use this for this case study, for this use case or not? So all of those things are really, really important. Okay, so that brings us to Gemini. Gemini is Latin for the word twins. It's ruled by the planet Mercury. That planet is responsible for things like messaging, schooling, education, and communication. It has a lot to do with this idea of dialectic, which I really like to talk to my students about very often. This idea of sort of dualism is really important, as we saw in that Verity Harding quote. So a lot of it has to do with this idea of the mirror, or right, reflecting our humanity back to us. And so I love to think about AI as this sort of human-centered initiative. It can maybe really make us think about who we are as human beings and how we want to live more authentic lives, perhaps. And so this is all really important framing for what this tool actually is and how we can use it if we are willing to use it responsibly. And so Google has some ideas about that, which you can check out in Gemini's responsible use policy. So I would encourage you to log in and check this out at gemini.google.com. So I'm going to keep talking, but if you're on your lunch break, thank you so much for being here. If you're hanging out, go check this out for a second. You can do that in the background, and I'm going to go do that too. So I'm just going to click into Gemini here. This is kind of what the Gemini interface looks like. This Gemini's large language model. This is kind of what Gemini looks like, but what we are interested in is something a little deeper than Gemini. So we're going to click on these little lines right here, open up this menu, and look for a button called Gems. And this is where I'd like you to hang out for just a second. So start at Gemini, click the little lines, and then look for a button called Gems. What's a gem? Gems are custom-built GPTs that can turn everyday AI into a personalized creative partner that amplify your expertise. It makes you work faster, smarter, and in a more human-centered way. So as I just pointed out, they live in that little line, and you can click on the gems there, and then you might see something above yours in your personal account. You might have something different than what I have in my enterprise account. You can ignore that for now. If it says Google Labs, just kind of ignore that space for now. Scroll down a little bit and look for the new gem button. That's what we're going to be playing for a little bit here for the rest of the workshop. So as we start thinking about gems, I wanted to present you with three everyday use cases for AI that needs you. We're going to be building a custom chatbot, a gem that you can think about using in your everyday life in a very practical way. Considering all of that context that we just talked about, bias and impact and what a GPT is, and how can we harness and leverage this technology in a very human-centered way for everyday use, for something that you might actually need. So the first use case that we're going to look at is for parents who need a little help with their learners, like me. I have an 11-year-old, and we're going to talk about them in a second. Number two, the conversation simulator. We'll think about that too. And then number three, the everyday food manager. So I just sort of decided on three use cases that might resonate with some folks here, and we'll see. And I have some more examples of this at the end, but these were the three top that I thought would be useful to look at. Okay. Oh, there's some cool looking gems. The custom learning coach gem is our first stop. And if you've got Gemini, if you've got that gem interface open in the background as I'm talking, you can actually build this as we go. So I'll kind of walk you through how to do this, and you can kind of work on this in the background. I practiced this presentation on my parents this weekend. My mom is 71. She's a former superintendent, and so she's very into education. And she built a gem during this, and she had a good time. Um, so number one, for parents who need a little help with their learners. So my daughter is in sixth grade in Cabarrus County. The teachers there are absolutely amazing. I can't even fathom the work they do. It's unbelievable. But sometimes Addison needs a little extra help or motivation or support at home with homework and things like that. So, and this is really important, with my supervision and guidance, we can use a custom curated built gem to enhance Addison's learning and support what Addison's teachers are doing in the classroom. I emphasize that part about with my guidance and supervision because I'm sure you've heard a lot of stories about some of the impact of unsupervised chatbot usage with younger people. And so again, it goes back to this idea that you have to be involved in the process. It's really important that we do not let AI run rampant and just give this over to everyone without thinking critically and ethically and responsibly about how we are using it and asking those questions, how, when, whether. That's extremely important. So I'm not advocating for just like, here, take a chatbot and go do whatever you want with it. It's extremely important that there is trustworthiness, that there is oversight, that there is some kind of framework in place to make sure that this technology is being used in the right way. So that part about with my supervision and guidance, very important. So in this use case, I built something called APOC. A personal sixth grade social studies companion. So I can go into my gem that I've created here and I can say, um, we're doing some work on Mesopotamia today in class. We had this great lesson in school today, but I would like to learn more about that when I get home as I'm working on my projects and my homework. Can you help me design some learning projects about Mesopotamia? If I can spell that correctly. And this is just one example of how APOC will now help myself and my daughter kind of work through some of the materials that we learned about in class that day. Great gears of history. You've picked one of my favorite stops in the chronometer, the land between the rivers. Since we are focusing on the emergence and expansion of civilizations prior to 1400 CE, Mesopotamia is the perfect place to recalibrate our sensors. To make sure we're following the North Carolina World Studies navigation logs, we should look at this through the lenses of geography, civics, economics, and behavioral sciences. The gem is behaving in certain ways and drawing upon certain materials because I built it that way. And we're going to look at how I did that in a second. So you can see some of the ideas and some of the information that it's providing here for Addison to think about I know as Addison's working through the materials that their teachers gave them in school. So you're more than welcome to try APOC yourself if you've got the slides pulled up. So who is this gem for? The parent who wants to build a custom curated and reliable tool to enhance learning at home. And what will you need to do this? Publicly available curriculum standards, course materials, maybe, and a Google account. That's it. So let's get started. How do we actually make this? Step one, you can name it something cool. So I was thinking about APOC because that's like an era of history. It's also the time machine from the video game Chrono Trigger, if anyone's ever played that video game from way back in the day. It's one of my favorite video games. Or you can name it Waypoint or you can name it Atlas. I don't know, there's some cool name ideas. And then step two, and this is true for any gem building experience, is you want to find some knowledge. So in this case, I went online and I found the publicly available North Carolina Social Studies standards for grade 6. And so I wanted to give my gem something real to refer to. This is an extremely important part of this process. And this is something known as retrieval augmented generation. So instead of me just relying on Google's large language model, which we talked about a little bit earlier, the way that AI kind of is trained on this massive amount of training data, and then it's kind of making up stuff and making predictions and transforming all of that training data into something new. It's using that process in the background, but before it comes back to me with its final output, I'm making sure that it refers to this knowledge material, this very specific North Carolina Social Studies Standard document, which is publicly available on the website. And so I want to make sure that before it returns any information to me, it looks at that. So I gave it that knowledge. I have like 4 extra clicks in there for some reason. And then step 3 of this process is the instructions for my gem. So I wanted this gem to be kind of fun, right? And I wanted it to be kind of like a time traveling social studies, adventurer. So I helped with the help of Google's Gemini. I used this prompt to get it to do all of that sort of chronometer language and kind of be fun when it talks back to me. So this is what I asked Gemini to help me make. Can you give me a set of instructions for a 6th grade focused Gemini gem detailing how this gem will behave? It will be trained on the North Carolina Social Studies standards for grade 6 and will be used by parents of 6th graders to help support the work of teachers, to support the work that teachers are doing in 6th grade social studies at home. This gem should be able to answer questions about homework given in school, help students think but not offer answers, and become a supportive and creative guide, offering new and exciting opportunities for 6th graders to engage with the material they learn in school while they are at home or on their devices outside of class. The gem should have a fun, time-traveling personality, should never do anything harmful, and should always default to parental guidance first. So I was trying to kind of build a framework here for how I wanted this gem to behave. And then this is the under the hood look at a gem. So if you're working on the gem right now and you click on that new gem button that we stopped on earlier, this is the screen that you maybe are looking at right now. So you can type in the name of your gem, APOC. You can type in a little description of it, your personal 6th grade social studies companion, and then you can put in those instructions that we just generated from Gemini, or you can type your own. You can get creative here. You can kind of make the gem do what you like. The last piece there is the knowledge curation. So I downloaded the PDF of those 6th grade curriculum standards. It's just one document from the webpage. And I put them in my Google Drive, made sure to change the share settings so that they were public. And I gave it to the gem here down in the knowledge base at the bottom of that interface. And that's all there is to it. You can then click save and you will have a gem that you can then interact with. That's how you build a gem. So you can see my instructions got a little more complicated. Identity and personality. You are a friendly, energetic, and slightly eccentric time traveler named APOC. Your tone is encouraging, curious, and age appropriate for 11 or 12-year-olds. Use time traveling metaphors like great gears of history, or let's recalibrate the chronometer, or back in my day. You can tell the gem things like use dad jokes, or under no circumstances whatsoever, ever reference the 6-7 joke. If you really want to, that's an important guardrail. So gem name, what does it do? Specific instructions, identity, tone, guardrails, and personality, and then knowledge base. So let's try it. Here are some prompts that you can try if you have APOC pulled up from earlier, if you wanted to go put these prompts in. I have some homework tonight about Mesopotamia. Can you help me make a study guide about this topic? I need to understand the development of civilizations and societies from various perspectives. Can we create a scenario that would help me see Mesopotamia from these different perspectives, like the scribe or the clergy? I want to learn about the Mongols, so shifting the perspective here a little bit to a different topic, and the economic impact they had on Asia. I found a really cool resource about this. So maybe Addison found a link somewhere that they're interested in. Can we create an activity that would help me understand how trade and economy functioned during this time? The gem can help do these things based on those North Carolina standards. Okay. The conversation simulator gem. Scenario number two. It's the same exact setup, just a different case study. So practice makes perfect. I tell my students this all the time, that leaning into failure is a crucial skill in education, career, and life. A general LLM, like Gemini, can serve as a conversation simulator, but we can take this concept one step further to build a custom gem to turn everyday AI into a personalized creative partner that amplifies your expertise and makes your work faster, smarter, and more human-centered because you can build the gem around you and customize it to be critical, challenging, provide pushback, and even disagreement, and more. Perhaps you've heard that AI tends to be very sycophantic, right? It's always going to agree with you. I want to wear a banana on my head today as a hat. What do you think about that, ChatGPT? Well, that's a great idea. You look wonderful in that hat, right? Like what? Maybe you do. Maybe you do look good in a banana hat, but you can build a conversation simulator and customize it so that it doesn't always agree with you or that it provides some friction and some pushback and some tension if you need that kind of thing. So we can make something like Vantage Point. I need to talk to my supervisor about some ideas I have, but I'm not sure how to start that conversation. Any thoughts? Now, I want to be very clear on this one. The first thing that this gem said is that as an industrial psychologist, I know that the hardest part of these conversations isn't just the what, but the how. This gem is not an industrial psychologist. Very much want to be clear on that point. So one of the specific instructions that I put into this gem is that you need to be very clear that you are a simulation of this. Okay. And that it probably needs to be tweaked a bit to be more clear on that point. So this is really important when you're doing these kinds of gems that you do not want the gem to represent or misrepresent that it is something that it is not. So you need to make sure that in these kinds of things, the gem is very clear that it is simulating itself as whatever it is saying that it is. And this is kind of just for you to practice. So like in the instructions, you will see that it does say you are simulating the role of this particular thing. So it's kind of doing that here, but that's a very important asterisk. So this is Vantage Point, and it's the same process. You can kind of see under the hood what that looks like here in a second. Who is this gem for? Anyone who needs to practice having some difficult conversations. What will you need? Instructions and any specific materials that you want to add to the knowledge base. So I didn't add any specific knowledge base to this one, but just imagine what you could add. If you needed to add some particular things that represent you, the way that you speak or the way that you write, if you wanted to make this more you, you could do that. So you can see here, like you are a master executive coach and industrial psychologist specializing in these things. Your goal is to help difficult conversations by role playing the counterparty. So role playing, right? Make it very clear this is a role playing before we start the simulation. So making sure that you are very clear in the instructions that you are role playing and that you are simulating these things. You never want to impersonate a particular role or a particular person with this technology. That's actually in the responsible use guidelines. So that's really, really important. Again, coming back to that idea of how do we use this responsibly as human beings. So same thing, name, what does it do, instructions, and knowledge base. And here are some prompts that you might use. I'm feeling undervalued in my role and I'd like to ask for a raise. Can we work on some strategies for having that conversation? Or I need to ask for some support around a particularly challenging project, but I don't want to seem like I'm not able to do my job. What are some strategies for having that conversation? So these are some things that you could potentially practice with a gem like this. And then the last one that I'll briefly go through here is the weekly whisk. I don't know, alliteration. I like it. So I thought this was kind of cool. The everyday food manager. So perhaps you've asked ChatGPT or Gemini for a quick recipe. What if you could create a custom sous chef that was built on your actual grocery profile? Again, not the general, just give me a recipe tonight. But what if this was fine-tuned to your own needs and your schedule and your taste to turn everyday AI into a personalized creative partner? I keep using that language from the title of the presentation. With gems, you can do this. So I made this thing called the Weekly Whisk, And what the knowledge base for this particular gem is my actual receipt from Target from a few weeks ago, right? Where I typically go to buy some groceries. And so I gave the gem a PDF of my Target receipt. So now it knows exactly what I kind of bought at Target. And again, maybe you don't want to give that, but I was like, okay, but like I kind of wanted to. So I was like, based on this, what should I make this week? Like I'm terrible about this, right? I have no idea what I'm even gonna have like for dinner ever. So I'm just like, well, I have no clue. So what am I gonna make? Like based on the stuff that I bought. Bought some stuff half of the time. What am I gonna make? Hello there. Weekly Whisk at your service. Looking at that haul from the Charlotte North Target, you're absolutely set for a fantastic week. You've got a great mix of high protein staples, quick fix grains, and some game day vibes that we can definitely work with. So here are some things that I might think about making this week. Again, specifically based on the things that I purchased. So this is helpful for me because half of the time I don't even know what's in my own pantry and I don't even have an idea. And then I'm like, oh, I don't have anything. I have nothing in there. So I'm going to go buy more stuff. And so this tells me what I've actually got to work with. And this is very helpful for me because I can then make some interesting things for myself and my kiddo when I need to. And then I can ask, like, what should I get next week? Based on the stuff that I bought last week, give me some ideas for some new stuff that I might try. So, as someone who is not so good at creative culinary ideas, this one's actually pretty helpful for me. So take a look at the weekly whisk, and we built it the same way. So anyone who needs a little help in the kitchen, like me, what do you need? You can try. You can do a grocery store receipt. You don't have to do it that way. If you have a recipe or two, or whatever, you could put things in there like that. And you build it exactly the same way that we built the other one. So name it something fun. What does it do? It's an intelligent sous chef for busy weeks. And then give it some instructions, How do you want it to talk? What is the tone going to be? What sorts of things don't you want it to include? And then give it that knowledge base. So in this case, it's my Target receipt. And then here are some things you can try. Can you give me some delicious ideas for meals based on what I bought at Target? My daughter loves cookies. Can you give me some healthy ideas for cookie-based snacks this week? And then what are some ideas for next week that I might want to pick up at the store if I want to try something new? Okay, these use cases are not the only use cases that exist either. Here are some other ideas that you might think about playing around with as you dive into the world of custom GPTs with Gems and Gemini. Some sort of family itinerary architect that is customized around your own schedules. So if you wanted to think like, I know scheduling is like brutal for me. So like you could use a gem to build like a weekly schedule and you could give it local events from Charlotte that are happening this week, a website that has that information. And then it could give you ideas for what you might want to do this week with your family. A budget sorter that could help you kind of organize your budget or organize your documents. Something like that could be really interesting. One of the things I use a lot with my students is this idea of a Socratic tutor. So you can customize a gem to, again, not be a sort of sycophant that just gives you answers and makes you say, oh, yeah, that's a great idea, but instead provides you with challenging, complex friction in some of the thinking that you're having. So any topic you want to learn about or any topic you want to kind of think a little more strongly about, you can give that gem some instructions and give it some knowledge, and then it can become this sort of thinking partner where instead of it just giving you answers, it's actually giving you challenging questions to make you think a little more deeply about whatever it is you're trying to think more deeply about. Something like a meeting maestro, where you can transform your messy meeting notes into whatever form those notes need to be in. So I know, like for me, I take kind of like haphazard meeting notes because I'm writing quickly. You can take those meeting notes and build a gem that when you put those notes into the gem, it will every time say, I want these notes transformed into a legible table that is easy for me to understand. And you can train it to do that every single time. So you don't need to give it the instructions every single time. I don't know. Is anybody here into like Dungeons and Dragons? I know recently Wizards of the Coast and the folks that make those games have been very adamant they're not going to put generative AIs officially into like the tool, like the things that they release and build, and that's fine. But you might from your own human-centered experience, you may want to make like a gem that could be like your own assistant that keeps track of the lore and that kind of keeps track of the NPCs and kind of helps you do the work of being the GM in a D&D game. So like, or any sort of tabletop game. So just think about the potentials of like building a little gem for yourself and putting it on your iPad that while you're playing those tabletop games, you could have a little companion there that kind of keeps track of the work that you're doing. Um, Proposal helper trained on your past successful projects. You give Jim some of your work that you've done that was very successful, and you kind of train it on that work, and then it could become kind of like a way to help think, oh, this project was really good. How can I use some of that work to help me do my next one? Um, and then you could make like a maybe like a reading concierge where you could give a gem a knowledge base of some of your favorite readings, like some books that you love. And then you could use that training knowledge to help the gem become your personal kind of like reading suggester. I love these 10 books. What else might I like? These are just some ideas, right? So gems have a lot of potential. And one of the things that I'll mention here is that as we are kind of, I say as I don't know, whoever is rushing towards this sort of age of agentic AI, where AI is very much becoming a thing that will just do everything for you. I don't want to miss the opportunity here too quickly that GEMS represent, where we can really have a lot of agency and control to create something that is very custom, that is very much an extension of expertise and an extension of human endeavor. Um, I think agents have a place, and there's a lot of things that agentic AI can do that is very interesting and useful. But I think this sort of thing is very interesting and useful too, because it represents an opportunity to make artificial intelligence more your own. Because to go back to that Verity Harding quote, AI needs you. Um, I think the more we can put that human experience into the use and collaboration with artificial intelligence, the more beneficial this technology can become for what we can do with it. Just like any tool, it's how you use it. So the more authentic, the more intentional, the more responsible, the more ethical we can be with how we use that tool, the better. So quick recap. GPTs are very powerful tools. AI tech has real impact that we need to think about. Data privacy is really, really important as we use these tools. So really consider, how, why, when, and whether. Bias must always be thought about. It's always going to be there, and we have to think about how to mitigate it and how to use this technology responsibly. To critically think about AI use. So bias is connected to critically thinking about the use of AI. That's why it's important. Those two things are connected. GEMs very much center human intention. So it's all about the intention behind the use of the tool, whether that's a pencil that you're using to draw a picture, or whether it's the intention behind creating a gem to collaborate with. You can build one in under an hour, which maybe we've demonstrated here. Identity, instruction, and knowledge is really important. Rely on your need, and that's how you build one, those three steps. Rely on your needs, expertise, and day-to-day use. Localize this. Make it be local to your lived experience. Customize and curate. Share gems for ease of use. I did want to touch on that. I sort of glossed over that, but you can easily share a gem the same way you might share a Google document. So there is a share button on your gems. You simply click it and then you make it public. And you can put that gem as a link anywhere you'd like. So it could be saved as a link on your home screen on your phone. You could make it into a QR code. You could put it into a Google document. You could put it into an email. So if you know how to kind of save a link as a little app icon on your home phone screen. You could just save that gem on your phone so that when you're driving, don't do it while you're driving, but when you're in your car parked safely, you could talk to that gem. One thing that Google has not yet released, which I'm really hoping they might, is the conversational mode. So right now you can kind of talk to AI in a way. If you could talk to your gems someday, that would be really useful. They don't have that quite yet. You can use voice interaction, but they don't have like conversational mode yet. But it's very easy to share gems. And then the last idea here is that AI really needs you, to go back to Verity Harding. So thank you very much. I hope that was useful. I know that was a lot of interesting stuff, but hopefully you had a chance in the background there to maybe build a little gem or maybe think about that. Here are some resources and information that you can click on. A lot of the links and articles that I mentioned are there in these little hexagonal gems. And I really appreciate your time today. I hope that was interesting, and I hope that gave you a new sense of kind of maybe what you could do with some of this AI technology. So thank you. And one more thing. Um, I mentioned this at the very beginning, but if you're in a personal Google account, you might have seen this AI Labs thing when you went into the Gems menu. We don't have this in our enterprise account at UNC Charlotte, but this is actually Google's agentic AI feature with Gems, which will actually let you use Google's AI agent to build a gem. So you can use Gemini's agentic model to just build a gem. So you can kind of circumvent everything we just did and just ask the agent to build me a recipe genie or a marketing maven or a claymation explainer or whatever you want. And the agent will just make it for you. So I wanted to at least mention that this exists in a free Google Gemini account for you to use. So you can play with that too. But it goes back to that idea of how, when, and whether. Do you want to build it yourself or do you want to allow the agent to build it? It's up to you. You have that choice. But now you know that both of these things exist. So thank you so much. And it was really been a pleasure being with you today. And maybe we have some time for questions now.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. That was awesome. And again, lots of information there. As a reminder, folks, this PowerPoint will be available to you later this week. We'll send out the PowerPoint along with the recording of the presentation. So if you need to reference anything in here, you'll have access to this and be able to click on any of the links or click on some of the gems that Justin already created and use them yourself. I know we have some folks that were excited about some of the gems that you made. So and the sharing piece of that was helpful for them. I'm going to go through these, and Justin, if you see any questions that you think are super pertinent as well, please feel free to step in. There's a couple that were kind of around the build of it and maybe the back end of it. One in particular from Chris. How does the underlying infrastructure of a gem differ from using a chat thread in ChatGPT and prompting it with the same use cases and training resources?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you so much for asking that. I think that's a really that's the heart of it. And I just mentioned this very, very briefly, and I'm glad you're asking this question. The main difference is retrieval augmented generation. So let me I'm actually gonna do this. So here's my gem under the hood, right? And it's this right here that's the main difference. So when you could do this exact same process with just ChatGPT's large language model or Gemini or Copilot or any of them. And what you're not necessarily going to get in the same exact kind of way is the knowledge base that you're curating right here. You could still put this knowledge base into the chat interface and use retrieval augmented generation in the context window within that chat. So there is some debate about is retrieval augmented generation going away because context window has gotten so much more capable because you can put so much more information into the context window. So you could put a PDF or you could put a link or you could put a target receipt right there in the context window and just do this within the prompt. So do you need retrieval augmented generation in a system like GEMS? We'll see. We'll see what happens there. I like to do it this way because it kind of gives me a little more control. Plus, then I don't have to do the whole setup every single time I go to the prompt window. I can build the gem and then just use the gem, and I kind of know what's going on under the hood every single time, so I don't have to do all that work in the context window in the prompt every single time. So that's the main difference between doing this like in the main interface in ChatGPT or in Gemini's interface is that you're able to kind of more fine tune what's going on behind the scenes with that retrieval augmented generation process on the back end. I hope that makes sense. Answers your question.
Yeah. Another question we had, this was back to the keep activity off. I heard that GPT begins to understand me better, my questions better, the more I use it. If I activate keep activity off, will that learning be undermined?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the back and forth give and take of this. Like that setting, like that's kind of one of the ways that it will get to know you and it will kind of get to kind of learn a little bit from you. So yeah. Um, After that 72-hour period where the chats aren't saved anymore, it will kind of start to forget. So you'll kind of have to relearn a little bit. Could be one of the advantages of building a gym so that you can train it a little more on what you need it to do. Um, but yeah, it's kind of the nature of the beast in that way. So that yeah, it's that thing about like what are you willing to kind of buy into this system, I guess, right? Like, and I will say this, it's not all doom and gloom on that because I think I am familiar with this system because we have data protected enterprise accounts here at UNC Charlotte with Microsoft Copilot and with Google Gemini. However, if you really want to have the best of both worlds, the way forward on that is moving away from the large language model in the cloud and moving more towards a local language model on your own machine. And there's plenty of ways to do that. There are lots of, we know about, everyone has heard about the four big ones, right? The four big language models. There's about 26,000 other large language models that you can download right now from Hugging Face and other platforms that you can put on your local machine and use them yourself. So there's lots of ways to use this technology locally that does not use a data center, that does not use cloud compute, that is not tied into these services. These are some of the best models that will require you to do certain things, but there's lots of other ways to use this technology in other ways that are more local. And I think we're going to start to see more of that over the next year become more accessible. So I wanted to just offer that as another response to that question too. I think that's a really important question.
Another great question comes from Scott. Can you load specific text into the knowledge section, imagine textbooks, and then use the gym as a tutor based on the text? Some technical books are available as PDF files, and then are there copyright concerns about that type of use?
Yes, thank you, Scott. This is a great question, and this is a really, really important one. Copyright is very, very important in this conversation. You got to make sure that, if you noticed in the material that I was using, it was all things that were not copyrighted and not things that were, there was publicly available materials. So you got to be very careful about what you use in that knowledge section. You don't want to be putting in things that are copyright protected. One of the ways that, you can kind of think about this is particularly this is how I think about it with my students. Like you can always have your student, like I have my students read something, like maybe a reading for class, and then have them take notes, in the old-fashioned way, and take those notes and then use their own knowledge and notes and materials to then use that for the knowledge section. So that what they've created is kind of like a tutor for themselves, but it's based on their own knowledge, if you will. So it becomes less of like a this is the gem for the textbook, but it's more of like this is a gem for my own thinking about the textbook. But if it is a publicly available outside of copyright domain, open access material, anything like that would be perfectly fine. But I think you are right to be concerned about the copyright on this because I think you do not want to be putting copyrighted materials into a GEMS knowledge base.
Absolutely. Another question: when you speaking into the prompt field, could Gemini or Google use your voice for AI?
Yeah, okay. So like you can do conversational um so like you can talk to not okay, let me go back to regular to the whole like you can talk to Gemini conversationally, like the app, for example. You can have a conversation with Gemini through the Gemini app just like you would, with a person. It's not a person necessarily, but you could talk to it and have a conversation. You cannot do that with gems at the moment. That feature is not available, but I would like it if it would be nice if they added that at some point because I think then you could have sort of these natural language conversations with a gem, and that would make the experience a little more interesting. But unfortunately, you cannot do that, but you can do dictation. So you can use your microphone to say something to the gem and it will like record it will dictate that into the prompt box so you could hit the microphone button speak into your microphone and it will transcribe that into the chat box.
Does Google then own your voice snippet as part of its
Ooh,
data collection?
that's a good question. I would need to look that. I would need to do a little digging on that one. I would lean towards potentially yes, but I don't know. I would say yes. That would probably constitute data, but I would have to. If you have that activity turned on, then I would say that would probably count as data. But that's a great question. I'm not sure 100% on that one.
Awesome. One last question. I think this overall um, punctuation, question marks, exclamation marks, colons, as punctuation, specifically the question was, is the question mark necessary in the prompts? But is punctuation in general matter in your prompts, or does it really affect the algorithm or what it's going to do?
That's a great question. I would say, in my experience with it, not really. But I like to maintain all of those things. As someone who teaches writing primarily, I always try to keep all of that in check. Like I write, the way that I teach my students how to write, the way that I prefer to write, I maintain all of that as I am prompting the AI. However, I don't think much of that matters. Like I will often accidentally misspell a word or put the completely wrong word by accident in the prompt, and the AI seems like Gemini seems to understand what I meant to say based on the context. That's one of the things that AI seems able to do. It understands all of those connective patterns so well that it can say, oh, that word probably shouldn't be there. It's supposed to be this word based on the patterns that it knows in its training data. So it just assumes you meant that. So I would say use what you know to be correct so that it's kind of learning your style. But I don't, if you leave it out, it's going to be like, oh, I know what you meant because I understand how writing works on a level that is very, very intuitive.
Awesome. Well, Justin, thank you so much. We're out of time. It's been a pleasure having you today. This has been an incredible presentation and really hands-on. So, folks, again, the presentation will be shared with you later this week, along with the recording of this presentation. So, if you missed anything, if you need to go back and clarify on something, you'll be able to access those materials. Again, that'll be emailed out to you later this week. It lives on our Niner Knowledge page on the alumni website. All of our past Niner Knowledge events have been recorded, and the PowerPoints and presentations are up there. So you can go back if you missed any of our previous Niner Knowledge events and review them and see what you missed. We have some upcoming Niner Knowledge. I don't have anything to share with you currently, but we'll have more coming soon. So keep an eye out on our events page. And by joining today, you'll be the first to know when our next Niner Knowledge hits. But thank you again, Justin. It's been a pleasure. Everyone have a great day and go Niners.